I never thought I would be part of something this dark and this terrible. But as I stand here and think back to that place, I can't escape the memories. It all began years ago, in a secret underground lab. The government started Project Genesis, and they were hoping to create a virus that could make people stronger and more resistant, especially in war. They wanted to push human limits to make soldiers who would never back down. But something went horribly wrong. The scientists worked day and night because they tried to change the human body to make it better. But the experiments weren't successful because mutations began to happen. Strange and uncontrollable changes that no one had expected. Then, the project became more dangerous, and the scientists were trapped in their own nightmare. The lab was hidden deep inside a tunnel and it was isolated from the outside world. It was silent, dark, and cold, and no one was allowed to talk about what happened there. But even in the quiet, you could feel something wasn't right. Because the air was heavy, like it knew something terrible was coming. One day, everything changed because of a breach and the virus escaped. It didn't just stay in the lab and it spread. Then the scientists who had been working on the project turned into something else. Their bodies changed and their minds snapped, and then they became violent, like rabid animals, with no control. Immediately, the government tried to stop it, but they were too late because the virus was too powerful. Because of this incident, the lab was sealed, and the tunnel was locked away forever. All the evidence was erased, and no one was supposed to know what happened. But deep inside, I know the truth because the virus didn't disappear. And it is still there, waiting to spread again. We were just two people and tried to have a fun road trip. Emily and I had been driving for hours, laughing and talking, when we made the mistake of trusting the GPS. It said we could take a shortcut, just a little detour through a quiet road. At first, everything seemed fine because the trees were thick and the air was fresh. But as we kept driving, the road started to get darker. The trees were closing in, and the path was getting smaller. Emily looked uneasy and she kept staring out of the window. "Jake, are you sure we are going the right way?" I shrugged. It is fine because the GPS says we are almost there. But I wasn't so sure myself because the road felt strange, like it was leading us somewhere we didn't want to go. Then we saw it, a tunnel that was hidden behind overgrown vines and rusted gates. It looked old and forgotten. But the moment I saw it, a chill ran down my spine, because the entrance was dark, and the warning signs were barely readable. Danger, keep out. But we were already here, and Emily's fear was obvious because she didn't want to go inside. "Jake, I don't like this, let's turn around." But I didn't listen and I told her it was just a shortcut, that we would be fine. "Don't worry, Emily, it is just a tunnel and we will be through in no time." Then, I pushed the gas pedal, but as we got closer, something didn't feel right because the air grew cold. And the trees outside the car seemed to whisper in the wind. Emily's grip tightened on the seat, and I could feel her heart racing next to me. We were already inside the tunnel when the first noise hit, like scratching, whispering voices that echoed through the walls. Then Emily screamed because something wasn't right. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, and I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. But it was too late to turn back now, and we had already made the wrong turn. Suddenly, the car hummed steadily as we moved deeper into the tunnel. But the air felt heavier with every passing second. I could see Emily's grip tightening on her seatbelt and her eyes were darting nervously. I tried to focus on the road, but the tunnel seemed to stretch forever, dark and cold. Suddenly, I noticed something strange on the walls. Symbols, and they were painted in red and black. They didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. So, I didn't want to say anything to Emily because I didn't want to make her even more scared. But these marks were eerie and almost like warnings. As we kept driving, the strange things didn't stop, because abandoned equipment lay scattered along the tunnel floor. Old, rusted machinery, broken glass, and what looked like torn pieces of clothing. I tried to ignore it, but something about this place was getting under my skin. Then, I saw it. A torn file, and it was half hidden behind a pile of debris. I reached out to grab it, and on the front, the words, "Project Genesis," was written in bold letters. I frowned and opened it as my eyes scanned the page. The file talked about biological experiments and containment failures. My heart raced as I read about the government's secret project, because they were trying to make humans stronger, but something went terribly wrong. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the tunnel, like water dripping from somewhere far away. Now the silence was unsettling, broken only by our breaths and the distant echoes. Emily's fear was growing and her voice was trembling as she whispered, "Jake, we need to leave." I didn't know what to say because I could see the fear in her eyes. But I still didn't want to believe any of it. "It is nothing," I said and tried to reassure her. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore because the symbols, the file and the noise, I felt like something was wrong. The car jolted and it made a strange noise and stopped. Then I hit the gas, but it wouldn't start again because the engine was dead. "Not now," I muttered and turned the key again. Nothing. Now inside the tunnel, my phone had no signal, no bars, no Wi-Fi, just the dark tunnel around us and the strange silence. Emily was breathing faster now. "Jake, this is bad. I don't like this. What's happening?" I looked around and tried to stay calm. But then, I saw something move across the headlights. A shadow? Suddenly, I froze and my heart skipped a beat. "Did you see that?" I asked and my voice was low, almost afraid. Emily nodded and her eyes were wide with terror. Then, we both stared into the darkness ahead, but this time there was nothing. Then, I told myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe an animal. But I didn't feel right because something was out there. Then, I grabbed a flashlight from the glove box and opened the door slowly. "Stay here," I told Emily and tried to sound calm. And then, I stepped out into the cold and I heard a soft scuffing sound footsteps. I turned the corner and I saw a body lying on the ground. Or at least, it looked like one. Then I saw it was a man and his clothes were torn and filthy. His face was pale and decayed and his eyes closed. I took a step closer. And then the body moved, just a little, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine and panic hit me like a wave. I rushed back to the car. "Emily, get ready to go." As I slammed the door shut, I felt it because something was watching us and something was waiting. But I had no idea what to do next. The car was still dead, so we had no choice but to keep going on foot. Emily and I walked in silence, the weight of what we had seen still hanging over us. The tunnel was long and narrow and it was stretching far ahead in the darkness. So, we felt like every step echoed like a warning. Then, we saw it. A door that was hidden behind piles of old debris and it was barely visible, but it was there. I pushed it open as my heart was racing. Inside, the smell hit us first. Something rotten and something wrong because the room was filled with broken equipment, shattered glass, and what looked like old containment pots. Some of them were cracked open and their contents spilled out onto the floor. Then, I stepped closer and my flashlight beam flickering over blood-stained floors. The walls were covered in strange symbols and they were similar to the ones we had seen earlier. This place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I turned to Emily, who looked horrified and her face pale as she covered her mouth. "What happened here?" she whispered. But I didn't have an answer because I was just as lost as she was. But then, I saw something on the desk. An old video log, and then I pressed play, and the screen flickered to life. The video showed scientists working in the lab. They were excited and talked about their experiments. But then things started to go wrong because one scientist collapsed and his skin turned pale. The others tried to help him, but soon they were also infected. Then, the video cut to chaos because scientists were attacking each other. Their bodies were changing and becoming something monstrous. My heart sank not because this wasn't just an accident, but because this was the result of the government's secret experiments. Now they had tried to cover it up and sealed the tunnel to stop the outbreak. But they didn't know that the virus was still here. Suddenly, a low and guttural groan echoed from the darkness. I turned to Emily and my heart was pounding because something was coming. And it wasn't human. The groans grew louder. Then, from the shadows, I saw them. Figures stumbling towards us. Their bodies were twisted, their faces were decayed, and their eyes were empty. They were zombies, just like in the video. Panic hit me like a wave and shouted, "Emily, we need to run." Then, we turned and sprinted down the tunnel and our footsteps echoed in the silence. But I could hear the zombies behind us and get closer, because of their heavy breaths and moans that sent chills down my spine. Then I grabbed a piece of broken pipe from the ground and then I heard one of them close behind us. Without hesitation, I swung the pipe again and hit one of the creatures. It staggered back, but it didn't stop because there were more of them. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, and every breath was harder to take because we couldn't outrun them forever. We needed a way out, but where? Because the tunnel seemed endless, and the creatures were closing in. "Jake, help!" Emily cried, and she was pulling me forward. Now I didn't know what to do, but all I could think was survival. So, we had to keep running and keep fighting because there was no turning back. So, we kept running with breathless and terrified because the sound of the zombies' growls echoed behind us, and they were growing louder and closer. Now we had nowhere to go, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. And I knew that if we didn't find somewhere safe soon, we wouldn't survive. Suddenly, we found a big door with a strange sign on it. "Restricted zone, do not enter." Emily hesitated because her face was full of fear. I could see her body was shaking and her eyes were wide with dread. "We can't go in there, Jake," she whispered, and her voice was trembling. "What if it is worse?" He grabbed her arm and said. We had no choice now. The zombies were too close, and we were running out of time. "Emily, we don't have any other option, and we need to get in now." With a deep breath, she nodded. Together, we pushed the heavy door open as the creaking sound echoed in the tunnel. Inside was dark and cold, and the room was filled with rows of containment pots. Some cracked open and their contents were spilling out. A strange and eerie glow came from some of them, and it was lighting up the room in an unnatural way. Then, I stepped forward as my flashlight scanned the room. Suddenly, a low voice echoed from the shadows. "You shouldn't be here." I turned quickly. There, we saw a man lying on the floor. One of the scientists. His face was pale and his eyes were glassy, but he was still breathing. His body was covered in sores, and his skin had the same sickly color I had seen in the zombies. He gasped for breath and said, "The virus, it is airborne and it is mutating fast." Then, I stepped closer and tried to understand what he was saying. "What do you mean? How do we stop it?" His eyes flickered with some recognition. "You can't because it is already too late. Get out, while you still can." The words hit me like a punch to the gut because the virus wasn't just in the air. It was everywhere. We had to get out, but now I wasn't sure how because the tunnel had become a death trap. Suddenly, the sound of growling and moaning filled the room. As the zombies breached the chamber and panic flooded my veins. Emily grabbed my arm and her face was pale and eyes were wide with fear. "They are coming. What do we do?" I glanced around and tried to find anything to help us. Then I grabbed a metal rod from the floor. It was heavy and long, just the kind of weapon we needed. And then I swung it at the first zombie that came toward us. The creature staggered back, but it didn't stop because there were more behind it. And all was coming at us with terrifying speed. "Emily, we need to find a way out." She nodded and her hands were shaking as she ran to the far wall. I kept swinging the rod and tried to keep the zombies away. But there were too many and I felt my strength starting to fade. Then, I heard a loud click and I turned to see Emily standing in front of a control panel, her finger pressing the button. "Jake, I found the lockdown system," she yelled over the chaos. Then, the sound of metal clanging filled the room, as huge doors slammed shut and it blocked off sections of the tunnel. It was only temporary, but it gave us a moment to breathe. For a moment, we stood there, breathing heavily and looking at each other. We were alive, for now. The panic was still there, but something else had changed because we were in this together. We had to survive, and we would do it side by side. We had to get out now because every moment felt like it could be our last. Then we saw the map from the table and we realized that it led us down a dark path. One that went straight through the zombie-infested parts of the tunnel. I could feel Emily's hand shaking in mine as we walked and tried to stay as quiet as possible because every sound seemed to echo and it was making the fear worse. Suddenly, there was a loud thud behind us because a zombie appeared and he was stumbling toward us with bloodshot eyes. My heart raced as I pulled Emily behind me and tried to stay out of its sight. Now, we could hear more footsteps, and I knew that we were surrounded, but we had to keep moving. We sprinted down the tunnel as we dodged zombies that appeared from the shadows. My legs were burning, but I couldn't stop because we had to survive. Emily stumbled once, and I grabbed her, pulled her up, and told her to keep running. Later, we reached a narrow passage where the zombies seemed to gather. The path was blocked, and there was no way around it. My mind raced for a plan because there had to be another way out. Then, I saw it, a door, and it was the emergency exit. Now we were so close, but there was a problem because a mutated zombie blocked our path. Its body was twisted, bigger, and faster than the others. I grabbed the metal rod, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The zombie lunged at us, and I pushed Emily behind me because I had one choice left. Sacrifice the last weapon we had to protect her. With all my strength, I threw the rod at the creature, and bought Emily just enough time to make it through the door. Then, I followed her, but my heart sank because the door slammed shut behind me, and I knew we had escaped. For now. The sunlight hit my face as we stepped outside. After everything we had been through, the brightness of the day felt unreal. We had made it out, and I breathed a sigh of relief. But something was wrong because the area wasn't quiet. There were military vehicles and soldiers everywhere. They rushed toward us, and their faces were cold and serious. "Come with us," one of them said. "You are under quarantine." Confused, and I looked at Emily. "Quarantine? What's going on?" Before she could answer, soldiers surrounded us and pushed us toward the vehicles. We had no choice but to go along. As they led us away, I felt a sharp pain on my arm. I looked down, and my stomach dropped because there was a small bite mark. Emily looked at me, and her face was pale. "Jake." I knew then that it was over because the virus had followed us out of the tunnel. As they drove us away, I saw the entrance to the tunnel in the rearview mirror. It was still there and hidden behind the trees, and I could swear I heard whispers. The virus wasn't gone. It was still out there and waiting for the next victim.
If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Please share this video with your friends and family too. Thanks.